Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand.
Why do you think young people like socialism so much?
Free stuff.
When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare.
As both Goebbels and Hitler were aware that oppression and terror alone could not provide a lasting power base, the mission of the propaganda minister was to seduce and guide the masses. In the words of Goebbels, the goal was to shape and mould the people until they become our slaves.
What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American.
Should we have more socialism in America?
It's one of the options we haven't really tried yet, and what we have been trying clearly isn't working.
To such an extent that despite of the abundance of information.
Who was the biggest mass murderer in the history of the world? Most people probably assume that the answer is Adolf Hitler, architect of the Holocaust. Others might guess Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, who may indeed have managed to kill even more innocent people than Hitler did, many of them as part of a terror famine that likely took more lives than the Holocaust. But both Hitler and Stalin were outdone by Mao Zedong. From 1958 to 1962, his Great Leap Forward policy led to the deaths of up to 45 million people.
A man called Mr. Lee showed his family Korean movies and music shows 40 days after his arrest. He was executed in front of 500 local residents, including his family and university students, etc. When he was executed, his daughter and his wife had to watch it in the front row.
The woman reportedly named Marbelis Vasquez is heard screaming, warning police her kids are with her as police forced their way into her home in the town of Cardenas. A member of the special troops, what's called Boinas Negras in Cuba, rushes in, pointing a gun at her family. In this video, you can hear the woman screaming, telling neighbors they took her husband and showing the pool of blood, fearing the worst.
No one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization.
White people are racist. So I put this up because I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, oh, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually. So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human.
It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students.
I'm 11 years old. A lot of grown-ups think that opportunities exist for all kids, and all we need to do is apply ourselves. But I know that's just not true. There's still rules to keep our schools separate and unequal. Why?
In the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students.
Yeah, I have 180 days to turn them into revolutionaries.
How do you do that? How do you
scare the fuck out of them?
Yeah.
Meet Gabriel Geip. He's a public school teacher paid for by taxpayer dollars at Intercom High School in Sacramento, California. Geip, who teaches advanced placement government classes, is not shy about his involvement in Antifa's local chapter. He even has an Antifa flag and a poster of Mao Zedong in his classroom.
Without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism.
The radical left is determined to ruin everything in America. That's what they're doing. Woke politics takes the life and joy out of everything. Wokeism makes you lose, ruins your mind, and ruins you as a person. You become warped, you become demented.
The result you can see.
And what you are seeing now, these images came and come in stark contrast to what we saw over the course of the daytime hours in Kenosha and into the early evening, which were largely peaceful.
Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government.
The president spent a lot of time on using the S word, socialism and socialist. It was a not too subtle, I don't know whether it's a dig or a enhancement. I'll let you decide.
I was flattered.
Okay, fair enough.
Civil service, business, mass media, educational system.
So the universities have figured out how to conspire in some sense to pick the future pockets of the students that they're purporting to educate, and they're not educating them, they're indoctrinating them, they're not teaching them how to speak, they're not teaching them how to debate, they're not teaching them how to write, they're not introducing them to the classical wisdom of the Western Judeo-Christian tradition. And that's absolutely appalling, because that's what the bloody institution was there for to begin with, and that's what it's supposed to be doing.
You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior.
And it looks to me like one of the things that really happened when the communist doctrines were brought into play, and it also, by the way, we did the multinational experiment, right? It doesn't matter where you put these policies into play, the same bloody outcome occurred. Didn't matter whether it was Russia or China or Cambodia or Vietnam, or to pick a random African country, or Cuba or Venezuela for that matter. It was an unmitigated catastrophe. And so to me, that's experiment plus replication. Enough. Enough.
In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid of society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place, and who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept, these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes.
Stalin's morbid paranoia grew. Nobody at any level of life in the country, regardless of whether they were in the party or not, was safe. From his desk, the Great Terror was controlled and conducted. Secret police orders gave every region an arbitrary quota for the purges. Category 1 meant death. Category 2 meant the prison camps. The purges struck many of the earliest enthusiasts for communism.
Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people.
If you're tilting towards the left and you're temperamentally inclined that way, and half the population is, then you have an ethical problem on your hands, which is, how do you segregate yourself from the radical policies that produced the catastrophes of the 20th century? And you can't just say, well, that's not my problem. It's like, well, okay, if it's not your problem now, it certainly might become your problem in the future. So, and I would say it's actually everybody's problem. In the aftermath of the 20th century, it's everybody's problem.
And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. Obviously they will join the links of dissenters, dissidents. Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America.
Australian police clashed with anti-lockdown protesters on Saturday. In Melbourne, officers were seen pepper spraying a crowd of thousands as they swarmed police lines. 7 police officers were hospitalised and hundreds of demonstrators were arrested.
Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches.
In 1918, Vladimir Ulyanov, better known as Lenin, had every reason to say that we have won Russia over and we must now govern Russia. Lenin's notes, letters and telegrams show his administrative style. You must display exemplary ruthlessness, execute by firing squad without asking anyone and without permitting idiotic red tape.
Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore.
But, you know, let's talk about what's really going on here, Martha, because our intelligence community just came out and said in the last few days that the Kremlin, meaning Putin and the Russian government, are directing the attacks, the hacking on American accounts to influence our election.
The world moves so fast there's almost no time for history. It seems like years ago that we were hearing that Trump was colluding with Russia, that he wouldn't have won the election without Russia, that his whole presidency was a kind of Putin plot. Well, there's now serious evidence that it was the Clinton campaign and Hillary Clinton acolytes that were directly involved in the generation of what has proven to be a conspiracy. Untrue.
A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom.
So I want to tell you about a book today. The book is called The Gulag Archipelago. And it's by a Russian author, a Soviet author named Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was in the Gulag Archipelago concentration camp system for a very long time. He had a very hard life. The Soviet system relied on work camps, and so those were large labor camps of people who were essentially enslaved, many of whom were worked to death, often froze to death, working in conditions that were so dreadful that they're virtually unimaginable. This is not widespread knowledge among students in the West, any of this, and it's because your education, your historical education, if you started to describe it as appalling, you would barely scratch the surface. These were the most important events of the 20th century, and they're barely covered at all in standard historical curriculum.
When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization.
In Eatonville, look what's going on out here. Everybody needs to see this. There's the main highway right there. Looks like we got an active COVID quarantine site going in here. So
basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials. Economy.
Mandating vaccines amid a worker shortage could spell trouble for corporate America. And I think that's true because when you actually look at the hard numbers, although we added 1 million jobs, there is now another record job openings, 10.1 million unfilled positions, and people won't take these jobs.
Foreign relations.
China has grown increasingly aggressive under this administration, and then now we're set to start trade talks back with them. There was concern when President Biden took office about his son's business dealings with China. He was supposed to divest himself of his stake in a Chinese private equity firm in December with ties to the Chinese central bank. As of April, he had not yet done that, and at some point you are going to get back to us on that. Do you have an update on that? Has he dissolved that interest now?
I'd point you to his representatives on that. He doesn't work in the administration.
Defense systems.
Pentagon officials downplaying concerns over U.S. weapons left behind during the withdrawal from Afghanistan. This is images have emerged of Taliban fighters with U.S. gear and weapons.
And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast.
First of all, on the issue of critical race theory, etc., I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually. And I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it.
The next stage, of course, is crisis.
We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us.
It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy.
Now Yelp is publishing some worrying data here that shows a 23% increase since mid-July in the number of businesses on Yelp that have permanently closed. According to the company, permanent closures reaching 97,966, close to 98,000 here, representing about 60% of closed businesses that won't be reopening. And that number could rise here the longer some of these restrictions remain in place.
Amazon on Thursday reported its biggest profit ever as consumers turned to the online retailer for their shopping needs and businesses paid it more to warehouse and advertise their products.
You have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized."
All of you asking when things will get back to normal, here is the truth. The only way to get our lives back, to get our economy back on track, is to beat the virus. You've been hearing me say that for while I was running and the last 50 days I've been president.
Okay, let me ask you about quarantine facilities just finally. I know that you're going to say they should have been made earlier, absolutely, and we could probably all agree with you on that.
This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks.
81 million Americans voted for me.
To bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C.
Hi there.
At businesses across British Columbia, this is the new normal.
Perfect. Do you have some ID with that?
Proof of vaccination is now required for everything from restaurants and gyms to theaters and concerts.
With benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not.
I promise you, if I'm elected president, you're going to see the single most important thing that changes in America is we're going to cure cancer.
He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins. Never mind, he will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. The United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot.
The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
45 and the end of the war through 1989 and the end of the Cold War, we had a worldview. Republican and Democratic presidents alike, from Harry Truman to George Bush, stood for freedom and stood for certain propositions that would make America strong and healthy and grow the middle class and shrink poverty and stand against communism. And after 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order, because the global order is changing again. And the institutions and rules that worked so well in the post-World War II era for decades, they need to be strengthened.
Novus Order Seclorum, a new order for the centuries, for the ages, forever.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
But it is the awareness itself that will drive the change. And one of the ways it will drive the change is through global governance and global agreements.
A new world order. A new consensus as to how life should and could be lived. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
I think a new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era. We have resolved that from today we will together manage the process of globalization to secure responsibility from all and fairness to all. And we've agreed that in doing so, we will build a more sustainable and more open and a fairer global society.
If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to, unless you want to live in Antarctica with penguins. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Okay, so what do we do? What is your recommendation to the American people?
Well, the immediate thing that comes to my mind is, of course, there must be a very strong national effort to educate people in the spirit of real patriotism, number one. Number two, to explain them the real danger of socialist, communist, whatever, welfare state, big brother government. If people will fail to grasp the impending danger of that development, nothing ever can help United States. You may kiss goodbye to your freedom, including freedoms to homosexuals, to prison inmate. All this freedom will vanish, evaporate in 5 seconds, including your precious lives. The second thing, the moment at least part of United States population is convinced that the danger is real, they have to force their government. And I'm not talking about sending letters, signing petitions, and all this beautiful, noble activity. I'm talking about forcing United States government to stop aiding communism. Because there is no other problem more burning and urgent The Soviet people, 270 millions of Soviets, will be eternally thankful to you if you stop aiding a bunch of murderers who sit now in Kremlin and whom President Reagan respectfully calls government. They do not govern anything, least of all such complexity as the Soviet economy. So basic, two very simple, maybe too simplistic answers or solutions, but nevertheless they are the only solutions. Educate yourself, understand what's going on around you. You are not living at the time of peace. You are in a state of war, and you have precious little time to save yourself. You don't have much time, especially if you are talking about young generation. There's not much time left for convulsions to the beautiful disco music. Very soon it will go, just overnight. If we are talking about capitalists or wealthy businessmen, I think they are selling the rope on which they will hang very soon. If they don't stop, if they cannot curb their unsettled desire for profit, and if they keep on trading with the monster of the Soviet communism, they are going to hang very soon. And they will pray to be killed, but unfortunately they will be sent to Alaska probably to manage industry of slaves. It's simplistic. I know it sounds unpleasant. I know Americans don't like to listen to things which are unpleasant. But I have defected not to tell you the stories about such idiocy as microfilm, James Bond type espionage. This is garbage. You don't need any espionage anymore. I have come to talk about survival. It's a question of survival of this system. You may ask me, what is it in for me? Survival, obviously, because unlike, as I said, I am now in your boat. If we sing together, we'll sing beautifully together. There is no other place on this planet to defect to.
Half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people like that.
I would bomb the shit out of him.
America, fuck yeah! So lick my butt and suck on my balls. America, fuck yeah! What you gonna do when we come for?
Yo, taxi! How would you like to be my personal driver for the next 30 days at $5,000 a week?
You wanna hire a piece of shit cop for $5,000 a week?
Cash!
What a country! America, I love it!